Real Estimations are brokers, valuers and consultants to the real estate industry. And I have to admit, I am one of those people that gets very excited when I receive your emails with anonymous agencies who are selling. And then I like to sit there and try and guess who it is. So thank you for joining me today, Mark Sinclair and Lachlan Sinclair.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for having us.
So tell us, what trend have you been seeing recently with rent rolls selling?
There's been a marked increase in people wanting to sell and a very marked increase in the number of buyers. Quality rent rolls are selling before they even get to market it, and they just walk out the door. We've got a buyer pool of buyers who have got great balance sheets, have got cash in the bank, and are ready and pay for good rent rolls. Conversely, if a rent roll is a poorly structured, low revenue, they aren't selling at all, and we actually have to hand them back. But generally, the demand is very robust.
Yeah. What's driving that? Is it everyone trying to be the biggest, or is it that just they're seeing it as a good investment?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think the fact of where the rental market is right now, I believe that that owners of real estate businesses are really just trying to capitalise on where the market's at. The expectation of rents potentially increasing as come March. I believe that they're seeing an opportunity to increase their operational efficiencies and general scale by bolting on small portfolios where they don't need any additional staff and they can literally just place it into existing portfolios.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other part to bolt onto that, which is very much a good extension from that point, is there's a higher number of businesses now out there going, look, we really like the recurring revenue from a rent roll. We can see that that's helping our business. So to cover all of our costs, we really want a very, very strong returning rent roll. And so they're treating it more as a business. We're going, how am I going to cover my costs? You'd clearly say, and also from your own experience, you'd much rather see a business where the rent roll's covering, let's say, anywhere between 75 and 90% of the fixed costs, and then the balance can be covered with sales, as opposed to a business with a small rent roll, which is covering 30% of the monthly costs, and the principal and the staff have to tread on that treadmill to get deals done.
Small rent rolls, what size do you consider a small and medium and a large these days? It's changed.
Yeah, I think small, honestly, would be anywhere under 100. Medium size could be anywhere from 100 to probably 400, and then upwards from there would be large. So the size of the portfolios has very much changed over the past 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a few big agencies, with thousands and thousands.
Yep.
Do you know? This is a random question, but do you know what the largest size portfolio is in Perth?
Currently, the largest at the moment is 4,000.
Yeah, I thought I was around that.
About 4,000, and we have, I suppose, mandates from 5 businesses that all want to exceed 5,000 within 3 years.
Wow.
So, and one of those is comfortable to go to 8. And that's a really interesting thing in the Perth market, because we've never seen people come into the industry and go, well, we want 5,000, we want 6,000. We currently have 1,000. I need to get to this point. So they're looking at this as a long-term cash flow business, and so the glass ceiling's gone. Whereas up until 3 years ago, Perth wasn't like that.
No,
it was all about, okay, I've got 200 managements and I do $1 million in sales, so I make a bit of a profit. That type of business is finished. We've just seen COVID. There's a big clean out, and Locke's comment. I think there's also an interesting point that sometimes there's micro businesses that have got 50 managements and work from their lounge room.
Yeah,
that works to a point. But yeah, I think your comments are right.
I think a lot of them that have actually been really interesting, Ashley, is businesses that have, over the past probably 6 months, I reckon at least 25% of the smaller rent rolls, so under 100 we've had, are where rent rolls have been attached to other property-based services.
Yeah.
So whether it's, a development company, or whether it's a finance company, or, a strictly sales business, that they're wanting to sell their rent roll because they're just not making any money from it.
Yeah.
So I think we've definitely seen a spike in the number of portfolios like that selling.
What's the smallest portfolio you can sell?
I think 30. We sold 15 once.
Really?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you just give them away to somebody?
Look, they come to us, but by the time they get it done and pay their fees, there's not a lot in it. But we just sold one with 2,500. That's settled last week.
Yeah.
So there was a portfolio of 2,500. And a lot hold on,
2,500 properties or $2,500?
2,500 properties.
Okay. Yeah.
But we do get Locke had a run where all of these people were contacting us, and we were literally making phone calls like auctions. We were bidding to buyers in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And these people, we've got 2 or 3 clients that have got really well-structured businesses, and they're happy to buy stressed portfolios of under 50.
Yeah.
But the stress that those sellers are under and their lack of understanding of the process is so high. It's really awful.
Yeah, and you tend to find that those smaller portfolios as well, unfortunately, that they are actually not harder to sell, but you tend to find that the actual trying to get the owners to follow that process that we provide them with, you tend to see there is a lower conversion than the larger portfolios, typically because they actually don't have the support behind them to be able to get out there.
They were never interested in property management in the first place.
Well, some of them surprisingly are. When they've left a work employment somewhere and a few people have followed them. I think that leads into probably the biggest issue for every portfolio, whether it's 15 managements or 1,500. It's that process of converting from a time a contract is structured, because every single client that we see, we turn around and say, this is not like selling a house.
No.
This is completely just change it. You and us, we're in business together for at least 6 months, and they go, wow. And then we step them through that process. And it's that lack of understanding the process, which we think helps people right at the beginning.
Yeah. I think people think that, I've got 100 managements and making, a couple of $100,000 in management fees, and I'm going to get 3 times.
Times that by 3, and that's how much
and that's what I'm going to get. But what people don't understand is if they only convert 50% of those managements, they're going to end up with a multiplier of 1.5.
Yeah.
So it's just the education process. And I think people underestimate the extent of dependence that they actually have on brokers to help facilitate that process.
Yeah.
Because it is very different from a property sale.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very different.
Well, I think it's changed a lot. See, I found it quite simple when we bought a portfolio, God, it must have been 2010 now, and it actually was quite simple, but I think a lot's changed since then, a lot more taken into account.
There's a compliance issue, there's a lot more regulatory issues. The bank's a lot more on top of the processes. We actually do consult to the banks.
Yeah.
And we've actually had a couple of very interesting consulting sessions with DMERs as they ask our opinions to what we're seeing out there. And because we've got really tightly structured contracts, DMERs love how our contracts are structured because it complies with what they do. How many times have you and I been called in when 2 people have done like a private sale? I've been an expert witness. I hate that expression, but I've been an expert witness in 8 court cases on rent rolls.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend who needed a bit of advice on something at once, and it was a private sale, and it was hard because they wanted to start switching over some managements, and you take that one instead because that one's vacant or whatever. Anyway, it was very, very messy. You've got to go by the by the conditions.
Absolutely.
It can be relentless.
2 things to consider when selling a portfolio. So you've got the price and you've got the terms.
Yep.
I think the terms is extremely, extremely important because what I personally see is that, typically if we're finding these smaller portfolios and we've got these bigger agencies that are buying them up, then these smaller portfolios are used to such a boutique type one-on-one service.
Correct.
So you really, to keep, to make sure the new agency retains those properties.
Yep.
The terms is really important. So I know that there's terms of the contract, but then the terms of how you're going to deal with my client, I don't know if that comes into it. Or...
Look, very much actually. I think that's a really good point. And part of the typically you'd find on a smaller portfolio, on average, we'd definitely be presenting multiple offers. So whilst we obviously go through and discuss the terms of the offer with the seller, there's also the discussion around the buyer and how that buyer is going to, I suppose, the profile of the buyer, whether it's going to be a really large property management business or whether it is something that's more boutique that the landlords may find quite similar to the existing service they've received. So going through that process and that process of elimination is as important as looking at the terms of the offer.
There's a misconception, really big misconception in the Perth market, that a big agent doesn't provide great service. Well, statistically, we've looked at everyone that we've sold, and the slippage, the amount of properties that are lost between a settlement date and the adjustment date by the new agency's negligence is very minimal.
Okay.
So I think it needs to be understood that slippage on a rent roll, every rent roll has to account for slippage. And the point of slippage always occurs at this time of selling a rent roll. And slippage is driven by really things that are outside of everybody's control. If someone's intending to move back into the property when the tenancy's up, that's one issue.
Yep.
If they're going to sell, if they're putting their kids into it. So there are factors outside of...
Genuine ones.
Yeah, but our contracts are structured that are very transparent. Even our offer terms are very transparent. So really, right from the beginning, everybody knows where they stand, what's involved, how does the retention work, what is a retention, what's slippage, what happens if this happens. So we've got everything covered.
Is there a standard retention these days?
It's typically, the standards are, 20%?
20% higher held for 6 months is typically what we see in WA.
Yeah.
So it is different over on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I've got to share with you the biggest myth about the WA management agreements.
Yeah,
okay?
please.
And this, a few people may not be happy hearing this, but everybody says to us, if I get a 2-year management authority, it's worth more than a 1-year management authority. And so we expect to be paid for a higher amount. Well, let's come back to that. The first thing people say is that, management agreement's really secure because it's signed for 12 months. It's not. If a landlord is unhappy, they can get out of that agreement. And then there's the argument about liquidated damages. So the reality is agencies have this false sense of security that their agreement is locked in for 12 months, and if Mr. and Mrs. Owner is unhappy, well, they can pay me out my liquidated damages. Why on earth would you go to the trouble of arguing with a person that is then going to ridicule you in town, tell all their friends never to deal with you? So ours is the only state in Australia that locks people in with this agreement. No other state. Every other agreement's got you can get out of it within 28 days. So it's really misunderstood. In fact, we had a client recently. This is the sort of thing that goes on out there, Ashley. We had a client say, the bank will only lend us the money if they're on 2-year management agreements.
Yes, I've heard that one.
It's not true.
Okay.
But, that is simply because the bank have got no legal jurisdiction to dictate what a third party will sign for. It's completely untrue. A bank looks at everything. They look at the risk profile, they look at the revenue, they look at the client, they look at the payback period. A bank can't turn around and say to you as the seller, you have to give 2 years to this fellow, 2 years to the buyer, otherwise we won't lend you the money. That's not true. What they might do is they might say, if there's incentive agreements that we see, isn't there?
There is, yeah. So you might see that a buyer will incentivize a seller. So X multiplier for 1 year, and then say a slight increase maybe of 10 or 15% over and above that initial multiplier for a 2 or 3 year authority.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the mind of some buyers, they do see that as providing them more security.
And that's common, but we need to explain that if someone wants to get out of it, they can.
Yes.
And the other thing that goes with that is that, and we say this to people all the time, so if you've got a management agreement and your landlord really likes you and you have a great relationship, and that's a periodic agreement that expired 12 months ago, versus an agreement that a new management authority, same rent, same management fees, same ancillary revenue, but it's on 12 months. The revenue that your business earns is identical. You're providing the same service and generating the same fees. What you are at is potentially at risk of a management going, but it doesn't mean it's guaranteed.
No. Absolutely. And I'm glad we agree on the liquidated damages clause, because I've always said to people, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I'm not someone who does hold people to it. And I happily cross it out for clients if they want it done in writing. But I'm finding that's a very common thing happening these days, that people are enforcing it. It's bad. I don't know. I just find it bad etiquette.
And the other thing that a lot of agents, which we've been surprised and been misunderstood, is they say, well, DMERS say that's through the department looks after us. We have that clause in there. It's nothing to do with DMERS. It's a common law clause.
And like you said, why would you even want to hold on to that difficult client?
Like you should.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if I have to, and it's not very often, but if I have a disgruntled client and they give 30 days notice or 28 days notice, I normally just wound it up just to the end of the month. Like it might be 14 days or 7 days, but just to keep it clean and just let them go from there. I'm not even going to hold on to you for 28 days.
The reality is, on all the sales that we've done, very rarely will landlords not sign a 12-month authority.
Yeah.
So the banks have got their security because it's a typical covenant by a bank
that
they want to see 12 months.
Okay.
So, and we all know that there are some landlords who are a stick in the mud that hate signing. You're doing a good job, Ashley. I don't really want to sign a new management authority. And no matter what you do, that's problematic. And we do have some conditions or how we're able to help people get around that. But very rarely will landlords not sign a new 12-month authority.
Yeah. Good to know. What are sellers and buyers wanting these days?
In respect to what?
To rent rolls. So buyers, are they wanting a quick, let's just hypothetically think, sellers wanting a quick settlement? Are they wanting to sell to someone that is like-minded to them? Are they just worried about dollar? Terms of a deal. What are they looking for?
For a buyer or a seller?
For both.
I think a buyer...
Buyers have got...
More money driven, do you think?
Depends. Most of them are looking for revenue.
Yeah.
Most of them are looking for the operational efficiencies. It sounds really trendy, but that's the reality of it, because a lot of our bigger buyers are going, okay, I can afford to buy that 150 or 200 or 400 managements, but I don't need their full property management staff because my team are currently underutilised. So we're seeing a lot more financial analytics.
Yeah, I think based on that as well, I think buyers are really looking at, I think the key characteristics of a portfolio, the average annual management income per property, what's the ancillary fees, what's the geographic spread, is it going to be within, a close geographic centre to where my office is, am I going to be able to service it? What's the existing, the operations of the business like? Is their vacancy rate really high? Is their arrears management half decent? Are they all net managements? Are they all inclusive managements? Are they hybrid, where you might be having an all-inclusive with a letting fee? So there's so many different attributes, I think, which they're looking at, the buyers are considering. So I think buyers' due diligence has increased dramatically over the past couple of years. So what they're looking at, rather than just saying, they're all 8.5% management fees and you've got a $400 average weekly rent, I'll go chuck an offer in. They're really deep diving into it. I think sellers... from a selling perspective, obviously terms, so making sure that the retention periods are in line with industry standards. I think restraint periods are really important as well. So getting a really good understanding of what the sellers are wanting to do after they sell, so whether they're going to retire or whether they're going to relocate. So you can't make those terms too onerous, but obviously you still want it has to protect the buyer and their investment to make sure that a seller's not going to encroach on those managements.
There's another one which is probably the most interesting one that we find the most difficult to sell, to the point we won't take them on any longer. Anybody that says they want to sell 100 managements but keep 200 and then stay in business.
Never going to happen.
Every time we've done one, they turn to mud, primarily because how do you choose the 100 you want to sell? A lot of those landlords they hear that they're still staying in business, they feel aggrieved.
Why are you selling me?
Why are you selling me? And they just get annoyed and leave. The ability to put restraints around a business like that is so difficult. So we've actually stopped selling them. And we had a very, very interesting case in question of an amazing business in a very upmarket part of Sydney. And because a senior property manager had moved to a fairly close location to open up a business nearby, there were 23 expressions of interest, 23 declined.
Wow.
Because of the risk of that portfolio ultimately gravitating to that ex-staff member. So that's what we're saying now about the due diligence by buyers.
See, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Bill and I have actually often thought about that. If we get properties in another area, maybe we should build up a portfolio and then sell it. So that's not cool.
Look, I mean, there's nothing saying that it can't be done, but the thing is that a buyer is just going to dramatically discount it because of the risk profile that's attributed to it, that they could easily gravitate back to you after 12 months and they might have paid you 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 years worth of management fees. So there's a big risk to them.
So we find that they're just difficult to sell. And they're not good transactions. So if you're going to sell,
go hard or you go home.
That's right. You either want to retire or you don't.
Exactly. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly. Is there anything that we can do to prepare our rent roll for sale to achieve the optimum price? So let's just hypothetically say I'm thinking that, and if Bill's listening, which he won't be, no, I'm not selling, but let's say I want to sell in 12 months' time, what could I do now to make sure I've got a nice clean portfolio? Yeah,
for sure. Look, Ashley, I think it's a really good question, because unfortunately not as many of our clients have that mindset, but the clients that we have worked with that are in the process, whether it be 12, 18 or 24 months down the track looking at wanting to sell, on average have achieved a significantly higher price because they prepared their portfolio. Typically where we start with is actually going in and conducting a rent roll valuation. So the reason why that's so important is because not only do we analyse the rent roll and look at all of the areas and how it stacks up against industry expectations, but it also identifies areas for that business to be able to improve over that next 12, 18, 24 months. So a great example was a business in the northern suburbs that we had, we did a valuation for, and they were about 18 months out, and they had quite a relatively low ancillary revenue percentage. So we said, go back out over the next 12 months, try working on increasing that. They were about 24%. So
I just wrote that down. What's normal?
Look, we like to see, look, a minimum benchmark is probably in excess of 35 to 40%.
40.
For ancillaries.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, cool.
So look, and they went out and they gradually increased those, and they were within that range, and we were able to increase the eventual sale price of the multiplier by, I think it was about 10 or 12%. So the investment of time into that, I believe, is a really good return. With regards to preparing it, we do help clients with getting their portfolio sale ready. So after the val is preparing them with a checklist of all of the things which come down to the compliance of the portfolio. So I think another myth is that, I'm going to go hand over the management authority and I'm going to get paid, 3 times for it. Well, no. If you don't have everything that's in that property management file that is required, then it's not actually paid for until those necessary documents are then provided to the buyer.
So you mean application, lease, PCR, you're talking about that.
Because I'm the buyer, you're the seller.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 3 times earnings on the understanding that you've given me something that I'm buying that's tangible.
Yeah.
And that's inside our contracts.
Yeah.
And the other thing on the exact thing you're both discussing, which is probably becoming very, very common with a lot more inquiries and people that we're catching up with. People say to us, look, we want to sell the business as a going concern. We're ready to retire. We've got a great business. We're in a great location. We've got 300 managements, et cetera, et cetera. And we go, okay, fine. Well, firstly, there's a big difference between an asset sale and a share sale. Most people don't understand the difference. If it's an asset sale, the management's assigned across from one agency to another agency. If it's a share sale, it's a business sale, it becomes an exchange of shares. The change of directors. Everybody assumes if you do a share sale, you don't have to have agreements re-signed. You still have to have them re-signed. But if you're looking at planning for the future, if you're engaging Lachlan and I and our team to work with you, and your plan was to sell in 2 years, 5 years or 7 years, we'd want to know a lot more about your business, not just your rent roll, because if you are structured properly, there's no reason why you can't run departmental profit centres and demonstrate to a future buyer, this is a great business. It's got a sales department that's doing this, this and this, and this is how much it makes, or it doesn't make. This is our property management department, and this is what we make. We're just doing an evaluation of a major business at the moment, and they've run their business like that for 7 years. And for 7 years, we can see that their recurring revenue percentage, their recurring return on property management is 45 to 51% per annum, just out of property management. So that's what we're saying about a great business. There's a difference between a great business and a great rent roll.
But people are selling rent rolls, not businesses these days, aren't they? Or are we still seeing businesses sold?
Look, they do. Probably the business sales that we've done are very much so on a larger scale where they can provide evidence that over the past 3 to 5 years that they have been able to achieve recurring strong profits. And that's where we can obviously look for each individual department. So delineated.
And maybe they've got a strata department. And
whatever it is. But obviously being able to show sustained profits over an extended period of time, that's when we can look at the business and say, okay, well, look, we're going to provide an EBITDA value on this business on a basis of the actual profitability. But again, unfortunately, a lot of the rent rolls we do see, just the way in which they've necessarily been structured, or very common, directors obviously taking the majority of the profit out of the business. There's really no value in the business.
They don't do that, Lachlan.
No, I know. So the only real asset they've got there is the rent roll. So look, preparation is key if it is someone's intention to look at selling anywhere from 12 months out, and it can dramatically impact the price in which they are able to achieve.
And we've done that with off the top of my head, I can think of 7 or 8 in the last 2 years where we've worked with them to do that. okay, let's work at this, and this. So it's not coming in to teach people to do property management. So
No.
we're not coaches. We're looking at it as an asset, as a business, as knowing what the banks are looking at and what our buyers are looking at. So there's no actual direct correlation. We won't say, oh, look, you were meant to go and do that routine inspection on that property 2 weeks ago. It's not in the system. Why haven't you found it? I think one area we need to share with everyone who's listening is that we get really shocked that when we are engaged to sell a rent roll, this is more rent roll than a business. So many principals leave the bulk of the heavy lifting and the communication to their property management
Yes,
team.
they do.
And
I know.
We're saying, Mr. and Mrs. Business Owner, it's your asset.
Yes.
You own it. You want us to arrange to get this paid. Well, you need to take ownership and you need to get into the trenches and you need to roll your sleeves up. We'll work with you and show you how to do it, but that's your part of the deal. We won't do it for you. You can't expect your property management team to do it.
I would want to have a guess and say 80-90% would probably give it to their property manager to deal with, their senior department manager.
Yeah, look, you tend to find in the initial discussions that's what they say. They soon realise once, obviously, we provide them with everything they need to know about it, their attitude very quickly changes.
Yeah.
Very quickly changes.
Well, they're the ones I would want that property manager to just be getting a nice bonus or something at the end if they were going to be, which they do. Yeah, I've seen that happen before. So, well, that is excellent. Are you seeing agents buying up small portfolios and investors with no real estate experience buying and seeing it as a true investment?
There's two. I'll talk about the investors. You talk about the gobblers of the smaller portfolios. There's a very big mind shift in the Perth market. Nowadays, the biggest players that we've been dealing with in the last 3 years, don't come from a real estate backgrounds. And we walked in and thought we could tell these guys what to do and how to show things. Complete opposite. They look at our industry with a fresh set of eyes. They look at it as an asset. They look at it as a cash flow asset, and they look at it as a people business. So these businesses have gone from 200 under management to 4,000 to 3,000 to 2,500. So they don't have an issue with numbers. They don't. There's a horrible expression used by well-known property management. Oh, let's count the doors that we have.
Yes, I know. Drives me up the wall.
It's a terrible expression because these people are treating this as an asset and as a business. And we've been able to learn so much from these people about they look at efficiencies, systems, team support, and they're really good businesses. And there's probably not enough room for many more left in Perth because these people have got.
You wouldn't compete with them. They are good. They're good people. So
it depends if you've got the wherewithal to have to put that amount of cash and that amount of debt into the asset.
Yeah, I've caught, like we said, I've caught up with one of them before, and I love their thinking of not having that standard real estate opinion of how property management should work. You know, maybe changing viewings to weekends and just changing their thought process.
Just a completely different perspective.
Completely different. And I was just going to sort of talk about where I think these guys are going really, really well is that sometimes we find mergers don't actually perform very well because they're not prepared for the change of growth. They just think I can just tack on this many properties and I can just keep on doing what I'm doing. When in fact, if you're tacking on that many properties, sometimes you need to change your systems and I can't remember the word of it. It's lost me. But the growth of the business is very different. And these investors, maybe they've got an accounting background or a legal background, they know how to manage those systems, which is really all it comes down to, as opposed to these standard real estate agents who like to be the biggest. And I mean, we've had them years and years ago. I don't know any now, but years and years ago, and they merge and then they go bust because they've just kept on doing what they do for a 500 portfolio, and that's where they suffer.
And I think the problem is as well with mergers is that you see, you've got ABC Real Estate over here and they've got their systems and processes, and you've got XYZ Real Estate over here, and you try and put them together and they're just speaking two different languages almost. So, I mean, the actual integration, they don't think about that whatsoever. No. So it's they look at it through rose-coloured glasses.
And Mark, you mentioned a good thing before about how, like, we do have this idea that larger agencies aren't offering a good service, and you're absolutely right in saying they are offering an amazing service. But I always just have always said that it's about expectation. So more with going back to that small portfolio being bought by the larger portfolio, it's yes, there's going to be a difference in service, but it's the expectation. So as long as that client knows what to expect and doesn't assume that, or knows that there might be some automated emails or whatever it might be, then as long as those expectations are met, there's no right or wrong way to do it.
I think an area where, as an industry, a concept that we see a fair bit of that actually confuses the public. Most people, when you say to them, and I've actually asked people this, do you know what a boutique agency is? And they go, sounds like somewhere you get dresses. There is the buying consumer public have this lack of understanding what a boutique agency is. So what is a boutique agency?
Can I give you my definition? You can tell me what you think, if it's right or not. So I would call our office, SoCo, a boutique agency because we are one of a kind and we are very hyper-local and we're more sort of niche in that. Do I think that we offer what everyone else does? Yes, but I think every agency does. But I just find that because we are very community-like and the hyper-local of it, for me is why I would, I don't use the word boutique, but I would consider it. So would that be? Yeah,
that's probably fair. But there seems to be a mindset that if a business is over a certain size, it's not providing service, and it's a marketing thing, and it's quite interesting watching it.
Yeah, and they I think smaller competitors try and use that against them by saying, oh yeah, you've got scale, so you can't service it. But typically, honestly, it's almost the polar opposite. The bigger ones provide better service because they've got all of the services behind them, and all of the people, all of the systems, all of the processes to provide an exceptional service.
And like yourself, we deal with a small number of agencies with high numbers of properties, and they're very open about their slippage rates, why they've lost it, why they've gained, and pardon me, contrary to popular belief, some of these businesses are getting to the size that their organic growth is happening because of their size. Most agencies we've seen, I would think, look, what are your thoughts? If the bigger your rent roll, the more you've got to put on to cover for slippage. Natural slippage and churning. Natural churn's what, 5 to 10% in a year?
Yeah.
People moving in, selling.
It's probably been a bit more over the past couple of months, but
well, when I sort of catch up with a few other business owners, we've actually just been talking about this moving into 2021, and I think some of them were saying that they've lost sort of 17%, just naturally, not from necessarily from bad service. And they actually have this feeling that going into 2021 that we are going to continue to see that as more investors are selling. We're finding our investors are selling because they're taking opportunity that they were so bitter when they bought the property, paid too much for it back, wherever, that they now like, well, I can at least get my money back and I'm not buying an investment property again. Yeah. So we're finding that happening. Our office has good growth anyway, so we've been able to definitely balance and keep on growing. But a lot of agencies, I think, are going to find that the slippage is going to be quite high.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that. They say, oh, well, if I've got 600 managements, for example, I'm going to lose 10%, 60 of them. I've got to put on another 60 to break even. But what they tend to forget, they've got to put on another 60 to be able to increase 10%. So it's not just putting on 60. You've got to put on 120 if you're losing 10%. Yeah. So if you're losing 10, you've got to build 20%.
Yeah.
So the other thing which we don't see a lot of, which is really good, but I think it might happen after JobKeeper comes to an end. We've had a higher number of people approach us over the last 12 months, whereby through no fault of their own, they've actually breached their loan covenants with the banks. And what's happened is, let's say they've bought 200 managements and they've got a facility with a bank, and then of the 200, 5% sells. So if they're at their maximum LVR when they bought the rent roll, and 5% has moved on through moving in and natural churn, their debt level might have gone from 60 to 65%. And the banks go, well, you need to put that 5% in now to get yourself back in track, and it spirals.
But that would have happened when the boom, when all those rents were so high. Like I've been renewing authorities and looking at some of these rents these owners were getting. Like one was getting $800 a week, and now it's been appraised at $600 a week. Like it's shocking. So if you bought that portfolio at that time, I have heard of that being a huge issue. And would the bank approach you? Like are they keeping an eye on it? Are they on the ball?
Absolutely.
Oh, really?
They've got their finger on it.
And in fairness to the banks, so we're not in a bank bashing exercise.
No.
I have to say that because we work closely with several banks, they work really closely with clients that they feel are in a potentially stressed position. So, and there's rarely do they just come in and pull the rug out from underneath them.
They
work with you,
them,
correct?
very
Yes,
much
yeah.
So the banks are there going, well, look, they need to have their asset protected, and they don't want the relationship with the client to erode. So they try and do it. They do a good job.
And they say, what can we do to? Yeah,
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. Very interesting. Can you touch base on your consulting services? So I actually didn't really know much about this side of your business,
Sure.
but if I was wanting to look at selling in 5 years, I could have you guys come in and consult for my business of what I can do.
Yeah, we do that. Mainly what happens in a business in that sort of role, there's 2 stages. We can do the simple wham bam valuation, this is what you look like, what are you doing type stuff, or we can work with you on a much more strategic basis, particularly if it's a longer term. You'd be amazed at how many businesses that we go into, and one of the first things that we ask for, can we please have a copy of your shareholders agreement, and can we have a copy of the director's duties? Well, we have neither of those things. Okay, so you guys own this business together, it's worth a couple of $1 million and you want to sell it, but you've got no legal framework as to what you're going to do to protect each other. What sort of insurances do you have in place? See what I'm saying? This is very rudimentary, basic material, because you want to sell this thing in 5 years' time and put a couple of $1 million and go and enjoy your life. But you expect someone out there to give you $2 million for a shambolic, unstructured mess. And that's the first thing. Okay, let's put together, go to your accountant or lawyers and get a shareholders agreement. A duty of responsibilities for the key directors, because that then stops the bitchiness which we get into of, I do all the sales and you just run the property management. So I bring all the revenue in, and I'm going, oh, really? So demarcation of roles, who's who in the zoo, what's your time frame, what are you capable of doing? And the next thing we'll do is we'll start to work with you to have your business structured with departmental profit centres. So when you are talking to the bank, other thing is if you're bringing in staff members who you think are the right buyers, they can take all of this stuff to their bank and their accountant. The management accounts of most real estate agencies are so badly structured that accountants, you can understand why lawyers and banks don't like what we do, because we treat it like income, sales, property management, VPA. Okay, good. And then you get all these costs, but we're treating this as a business, so that's a lot of what we do.
So very much more like the business consulting, as opposed to, that's a separate thing to the rent roll consulting.
I think as well, there's obviously a lot of other services that we provide, obviously like a buyer's agency service. So look, we obviously get approached by a lot of buyers who maybe even have had a preliminary discussion with a potential seller, and they need someone to help them just to facilitate the entire process. So, go through and obviously structure the agreement, help them with the transfer of those managements and putting together a communication strategy, how that entire thing works. Obviously, we work with a lot of large franchise groups as well, working with their franchisees. So there's a lot of different areas in which we cover.
So the consultancy service, you could also, and one thing that I've come across and I hear a few people talking about is the option of growing organically versus buying. So I guess you guys could actually come into a business and say, well, this is where you're at, this is your head count, this is your portfolio. You could buy, 80 properties with your existing staff, and that actually could be quite a good business decision to make, as opposed to growing it organically. So you could sort of do something like that, couldn't you?
We do. Another thing that we do is that we call it a cost cover ratio, which is effectively break it down quickly to work out what's it cost in this office to have a rental. What's it per management? You need to be making a minimum of 25% or 30% out of your rent roll. So if you've got all this low-hanging fruit, instead of making 25 or 30% out of, you might be making 15%. So why would you have a rent roll or that portion of your rent roll? So we'd be saying, look, rather than just growing for the sake of growth's sake, if you're getting into managements, everything that you need to be looking at an average weekly rent above 500. On 500 on your cost base, you're going to make 25 or 30% return. And people are going to go, wow, well then I've got an asset instead of a rent roll.
And that's what you see so many people of, that they don't even know what it actually costs them to manage a property. They're taking on something that, even with their ancillary collection, they're pretty much either going to break even or lose money on. So what's the point of even having it? Growing a rent roll for the sake of growing it doesn't make it worth more.
No. And I just caught myself saying 80 properties. Well, actually, it's not actually even about the 80 properties. It's about I need an extra $100,000
In revenue, correct.
in revenue
Yeah,
to make it worthwhile.
And I think that's a really good point, actually, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people get fixated on, my rent roll's 400 or 500 or 600.
Yeah.
But depending on where you're socioeconomically
I'm going
based,
to say it for you.
Okay.
You are either in Kelmscott or you're in, Claremont.
Sure, you said
example.
it.
That's
Yes,
right. That's what I'm saying
exactly.
for you.
It's on the record.
Yeah.
So look, obviously,
There's a difference.
there is a considerable difference, because you might have an average weekly rent in Kelmscott, in your example, at $300 a week, or you're in Claremont.
Go down a little bit, maybe $200 a week.
Sure, or you're in Claremont and it's $600 a week. So you've still got the same essentially overheads, but your revenue is considerably higher and your profitability is going to be considerably higher. So, but again, there's businesses that are in those particular areas, like a Kelmscott, where they have set up their businesses really, really well, and are making really, really good money out of it. So it's still very much so achievable.
Oh, absolutely, and there's a great one in Kelmscott, and they are high volume, and they've got the lower portfolio, but they are one of the more high performing agencies in Perth. They're excellent. So you're right. It's just whatever your business structure is and your business decision is, whether you're going on volume or whether you're going on.
It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, no, it's not.
And that's part of our consulting. We need to understand what it's costing you to keep a management.
Yeah.
And if your break even points on a weekly rent of let's say $350 a week, that's break even. Well, everything under 400 should be not got rid of at that stage. Replace it with 2. Bring 2 on, get rid of one of the 350. Bring another 2 on, get rid of the 350.
Increase that average.
That's right. And I do think that there's going to be a big spike in rents in March, like everybody.
Yeah, but that's the problem. Like, you've got these directors of the business who are not, don't divulge those figures to the BDM, who's out there negotiating for them. And you need to trust your BDM and expose a little bit of,
it
finances
comes
to
down
them.
to communication. And and I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
The biggest industry issue, and this will probably ruffle a few feathers, but the facts are the facts on this. And I followed this up from someone else who raised it. Go onto every website of any agency, see where sales are and see where property management is. Sales are always at the top, property management is always at the bottom. London to a brick, and I will make a bet with anybody out there, we rarely see sales divisions making great profits. In fact, we have seen them down as low as 3%. And I said, why on hell would you deal with all that rubbish to make 3% out of your sales department? They're making 40% out of property management and going, oh, but there's this thing, there's the kudos and the excitement and the thrill, and that's great, and that's terrific, and I'm not trying to be facetious, but at the same time, I've just recently, nurture your rent roll. That's the asset. We did recently, the analysis of what we've seen on sales departments selling for a profit is negligible. It doesn't exist. But most agencies put all of their energy into doing that, and they only like the property management at the end of the month, pick up the check, and off we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of doing the sort of the PM Collective podcast, is that I just find that the sales side of things, it's glamour and it's nice cars and it's nice social media and it's all of this nice blingy stuff. And property management is just the basic, poor cousin of it. It's not glamorized. And I keep on saying that's not the right word, but it's not a glamorized industry. I mean, the property management is a very high-end, chosen career path, professional, and should be a lot fancier than what it currently is being perceived as. So
I think that's a really good point, and there's elements that are pushing through to start making it look like that. And I think that's evidenced by the number of dedicated property management businesses that just do property management. And I can tell you, there's some unbelievable operators in Perth that are at that 400 to 500 mark, and those businesses are going to push through in the next 2 to 3 years. And they are very impressive.
But they're ironically, they're the ones that make more money out of sales than any other business that has a sales department. Because they refer pretty much all their business, have no sales team, and they're making 25 to 30% out of sales,
We've got a client,
and have no sale employees.
So we've got a couple of clients that actually don't have a sales department, but have sales commission as an income code, and it's actually the referrals off the rent roll.
Okay.
And what they do is they say, I don't want a salesperson, I don't want all the overheads, I don't want the grief, I don't want any of it. And one guy in particular, they have a very smart arrangement. He has an arrangement with 4 agencies in different parts of Perth, and he says, you can have these 30% of the clip of the ticket, not 25% or 20%, 30%. And they're going, okay, we'll grab it. So he's got this little income code, he's made 30% on that.
Great.
And it hasn't cost him anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he gets the revenue in the door. But there's all sorts of ways. I think what's really nice about Perth, it's changing, it's maturing, it's growing up.
Yeah.
We've got a lot more sophisticated people coming into our industry, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All-inclusive, do they annoy you? All-inclusive packages that us property managers sometimes do?
I don't think they are annoying. I think there's a big misunderstanding about why they are not worth as much as, say, a net management or your 8.5% plus or your ancillaries.
And surely people know that you don't just put the multiple on the all-inclusive, don't they?
Yeah.
Do they know that? Yeah.
So what people, I think, although overall you might be achieving the same amount as a net management for the same property, the problem is that you're obviously not receiving any ancillary revenue. So we obviously, off the benchmarks in which we've identified in our valuation, the necessary discount has to be made to that all-inclusive management to bring it down in line with the net management.
So if we've talked about a 35% ancillary, would you use that ratio on an all-inclusive?
In and around that.
Around that,
it does depend. Obviously, we have to align it with what the remainder of the portfolio is, if it is a net portion. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not like, we're going to take 50% off or 40% off. So there is, a method to our madness, and obviously the algorithms in which we've developed to make sure that the discount for an all-inclusive is reflected accordingly. But in saying that as well, is that, and again, this comes back to obviously our analysis and the way in which our valuations have changed, the way in which banks look at rent rolls, is the deep dive into all-inclusives. Because back in the day, you might say, I'm getting a letting fee and an admin fee, but, I'm still going to discount it. Well, no, that's not really fair. So that's where we've I suppose, come up with the terminology of a hybrid management, which is where you might have an all-inclusive, plus 2-week letting fees and maybe an admin fee. So obviously that's going to reflect a much smaller discount than what you might be getting, say, 20% as an ancillary on that compared to 40% as the remainder of your portfolio. Yeah. So look, it swings and roundabouts, but it is
there's a calculation, there's a method to it.
For sure.
Probably there's two things to I suppose touch on that basis. We've now completely changed the way rent roll's valued. Mainly the way that Lachlan's torn it apart and rebuilt it arbitrarily. Historically, we've looked at the current management fee and applied a multiplier in relation to the fees. But like you share with what you've done with this now, because it's completely changed, and the banks love it.
I think what it is that, look, I think as Mark said before, look, back in the day it was you got 8.5% and it's $400 a week. I'm going to put 2.5 on it. But what we've done now, we've said, well, look, obviously you might have a property that's 8.5% and it's let's use the previous example in Kelmscott. Why would you apply the same multiplier to that if you've got the same a property in Claremont at 8.5% as well? It doesn't really make sense. So what we've done is that we've broken down the average annual management income per property, right, into different segments based off what they're making, right, and we've weighted it accordingly to a different multiplier to reflect its direct income. All right. Now we look each individual management. We look at the geographic spread. We look at multiple owners. Looking at obviously ancillary income. There's a lot of like demand and risk factors. Your vacancy rate, your arrears rate. Are there the property types as well? Is there a lot of furnished in there as well? Obviously because they take up more time. Is there's a big portion of the portfolio furnished? Is there any student accommodation hypothetically in there? Is there a bigger concentration of, say, green title properties compared to strata title properties? There's about 16 different factors that we've actually broken down. We've weighted them accordingly, and that is now how we look and how we value rent rolls.
And that's what the banks like what we're doing. So our valuation is not a 4-page document. No. So it's a really thorough exercise in what we now do.
Yeah.
And in regards to give you a guide of what all-inclusives that we've sold in the last 18 months range from $1.30 to $2.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're always in that sort of range, but they do go down as low as $1.30.
Yeah. Okay.
And when we're valuing a rent roll, we're just saying this is an asset. It's income driven. It's got to be done on a matrix. It's got to be weighted. Yeah. And people get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why that's why it works well.
Yeah. So much to understand you there. That's why it's easy just to get you guys in.
It does.
Well, thank you for joining me. I think that for me, the main things are preparing your rent roll for sale and allowing for enough time to do that. Consulting, so it could be business consulting or it could be the rent roll consulting. Yep. They're sort of the two main takeaways. And having someone like yourselves in to actually look at that whole ancillary ratio for me is a really big thing, because we don't know these things unless we discuss them publicly. Correct. And that's a really just a little tiny thing that people could go back to and say, okay, well, how are my ancillaries looking? Because we do put so much focus on management fees. So I think that is a great thing for us all to go do little annual cleanups and checks of it as well. So and last thing we'll leave with is predictions for the future of real estate businesses. Do you think we're going to see lots of people still wanting to sell, or we're going to get a halt, or are we going to see fees down?
I reckon we're going to see a lot more consolidation over the next 12 to 18 months. I think the bigger guys are going to get bigger. Yep. And I think the smaller agencies are going to fade out.
That's exactly what I reckon too. I agree.
Yeah, I would support that completely. I think that's a very fair observation.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's exactly where I think it's going to go. So I think the people that have got the 50, 100 properties will soon start thinking, you know what, maybe it's easier just to go work for somebody. One of those bigger agencies that needs the property managers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Or cash out and move on to something else.
Yeah.